The actors who were real-life war heroes. We see theirs on the silver screen, larger than life. They're cowboys, detectives, charming gentlemen, and sometimes even soldiers. They face down villains and command armies in carefully constructed worlds of make-believe. But for a remarkable generation of actors, the call to heroism wasn't just a script handed to them by a studio. It was a duty they answered in the real world, on the battlefields of the Second World War. These men, who were already stars or on the verge of fame, willingly traded the comfort of Hollywood for the chaos of combat. Imagine the friendly George Bailey from It's a Wonderful Life, but now picture him piloting a bomber through skies thick with enemy flak. Think of the king of Hollywood, Clark Gable, not in a tuxedo, but hunched over a machine gun in the freezing belly of a B-17. Or picture the wise, calm face of Obi-Wan Kenobi and see him as a young naval officer, steering a landing craft through the crashing waves of an amphibious invasion. These guys weren't just playing heroes. They were commanding troops, surviving prisoner-of-war camps, and serving in elite, secret units. Today, we're uncovering the untold stories of the actors who were real-life war heroes, whose incredible acts of bravery were more dramatic than any movie they ever starred in. Section 1. James Stewart, the reluctant hero who demanded to fight. At the height of his fame, James "Jimmy" Stewart was the American everyman, with an Oscar for The Philadelphia Story and a beloved public persona. He had every reason to stay in Hollywood. By 1941, he was one of the biggest movie stars on the planet. But as war raged in Europe, Stewart, a licensed pilot with a strong sense of duty, felt a different calling. When he first tried to enlist in the Army Air Corps, he was rejected. At 6'3", he was too underweight. But that wasn't going to stop Jimmy Stewart. He went on a high-calorie diet and, with a stubborn determination that would define his military career, he tried again. This time, he was in. The Army, though, saw him as a tool for morale. They wanted to keep the famous actor far from the front lines, making training films and showing up at Bond rallies. It was a comfortable, safe role that anyone in his position would have accepted. But Jimmy Stewart had no interest in being a fake in a war studio. He signed up to fight, and he bugged his superiors relentlessly for a combat assignment. His persistence paid off. In 1943, Captain Stewart was finally sent to England with the 445th Bombardment Group. He was given command of a squadron flying B-24 Liberators. Suddenly, the man America knew for his on-screen charm was responsible for the lives of hundreds of young airmen on some of the most dangerous missions of the war. Stewart didn't just lead from the ground. He insisted on flying in the lead bomber on his squadron's riskiest missions deep into Nazi-occupied Europe, hitting heavily fortified targets in Germany. His men said their commander was quiet and serious, a huge contrast to his folksy screen image. He understood the crushing weight of command, the psychological toll of sending men into battle, and the fear that gripped every crew member. He flew at least 20 official combat missions, though many believe the number was actually higher, since he often flew unofficially to fill in for an absent pilot. By the war's end, Jimmy Stewart was a decorated hero. He had risen from a private, rejected for being too skinny, to a full colonel. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal, and the French Croix de Guerre. He returned to Hollywood a changed man, quieter and more thoughtful. He rarely spoke of the horrors he witnessed, but they no doubt informed the depth he brought to his post-war roles, especially as the tormented George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life. He remained in the Air Force Reserve for 2 more decades, eventually retiring as a brigadier general, making him the highest-ranking actor in American military history to see combat. Section 2. Audie Murphy, the most decorated soldier in American history. Before Audie Murphy ever stood in front of a camera, he was already a legend. His isn't the story of a movie star who went to war, but of a war hero who, by a twist of fate, became a movie star. Murphy's journey began in rural Texas, where he was born into a large family of poor sharecroppers. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, he was just a teenager, but he felt an immediate need to serve. His boyish face and small frame made him look even younger than he was. When he tried to enlist, the Marines and the Navy turned him down for being underweight and too short. But the Army finally took him, having no idea they had just signed up the man who would become the single most decorated American combat soldier of World War II. Murphy's combat career kicked off with the invasion of Sicily in 1943. From there, he fought his way through Italy and France, showing a level of bravery that was almost unbelievable. He was wounded 3 times, fought in 9 major campaigns, and was credited with taking out over 240 enemy soldiers. He earned every medal for valor the US had to offer, plus awards from France and Belgium. The act that earned him the Medal of Honor went down in January 1945 in France. Second Lieutenant Murphy's company was attacked by 6 German tanks and waves of infantry. Outnumbered and outgunned, he ordered his men to fall back to the woods. He stayed put, calling in artillery strikes on the advancing enemy. Then, an American tank destroyer next to him took a direct hit and caught fire. As the crew bailed out, Murphy, all alone and exposed to enemy fire from 3 sides, did the unthinkable. He climbed onto the burning tank destroyer, which was packed with fuel and ammunition and could have exploded at any second. He grabbed its .50 caliber machine gun and opened fire on the German infantry. For an hour, he single-handedly held off the attack, mowing down dozens of soldiers and stopping the German assault in its tracks. He was shot in the leg, but ignored it, continuing to fire until he ran out of ammo. German troops got as close as 10 yards before he cut them down. Only then did he make his way back to his men, refuse medical attention, and lead a successful counterattack. After the war, his face on the cover of Life magazine caught the eye of actor James Cagney, who invited him to Hollywood. He ended up starring in over 40 films, mostly westerns. In 1955, he played himself in the movie version of his autobiography, To Hell and Back. But behind the fame, Murphy was haunted. He suffered from severe PTSD and slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow for years. He became one of the first public figures to speak openly about the psychological wounds of war, fighting for veterans' mental health when the subject was still taboo. Section 3. Clark Gable, the King of Hollywood, answers the call. In 1942, Clark Gable was, without a doubt, the King of Hollywood. The star of Gone with the Wind was at the absolute peak of his career, an icon of masculine charm. He was also 41 years old, well past draft age, but his life was shattered by 2 things: the attack on Pearl Harbor and, just a month later, the tragic death of his wife, actress Carole Lombard, in a plane crash while she was returning from a war bond tour. Devastated and driven by patriotism, Gable decided to enlist. He sent a telegram directly to President Franklin D. Roosevelt asking for a combat assignment. Both the president and his studio, MGM, urged him to stay home, but Gable's mind was made up. He joined the Army Air Forces in August 1942, insisting on starting as a private and working his way up. The Army, however, had a special plan for him. General Hap Arnold, the head of the Army Air Forces, tasked him with making a recruitment film about aerial gunners. Gable went to officers' candidate school, graduated as a second lieutenant, and was sent to England in 1943 to start filming. But Clark Gable wasn't about to make his movie from a safe soundstage. To get the real combat footage he needed, he insisted on flying on actual bombing missions over Nazi Germany. He was officially credited with 5 combat missions, but veterans who served with him swear he flew many more. He flew on B-17 flying fortresses, manning a gun and a camera right in the heart of enemy territory. His 5th mission was almost his last. A 20mm cannon shell tore through the flight deck, passed just inches from his head, and ripped the heel clean off his boot before exiting the plane without exploding. On a different mission, his bomber came back to base riddled with bullet holes. Adolf Hitler, who was supposedly a fan of Gable's movies, had even offered a big reward for his capture. Gable returned to the US in late 1943 with over 50,000 feet of film, which became the movie Combat America. He was promoted to major, and when his discharge papers were signed in 1944, the officer who signed them was none other than Captain Ronald Reagan. For his service, Gable was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Air Medal. He went back to Hollywood and resumed his career, but those who knew him said the war and the loss of his wife had left a mark on his soul that never faded. It's incredible to think about, isn't it? That behind these famous faces were real stories of courage and sacrifice. If you're finding these hidden histories as fascinating as we do, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us bring more of these stories to light. Now let's get back to another legend of the screen, whose wartime service was straight out of a spy novel. Section 4. Christopher Lee, From Dracula to Special Operations. Christopher Lee is a cinematic icon. His towering presence and deep voice defined some of the most memorable villains in movie history. He was Dracula, the Bond villain, Scaramanga, Saruman in The Lord of the Rings, and Count Dooku in Star Wars. But before he ever wore a cape or wielded a lightsaber, Lee was involved in some of the most secret and dangerous operations of World War II. When the war started, Lee volunteered to fight for the Finnish army against the Soviets in the Winter War. After that, he returned to Britain and joined the Royal Air Force. But a problem with his optic nerve meant he couldn't be a pilot. Undeterred, he was reassigned to RAF intelligence. He served in North Africa and Italy, where his fluency in multiple languages made him a huge asset. He worked, in his own words, as a liaison officer, moving between different units and operating behind enemy lines. And this is where his story gets shrouded in mystery. Lee was attached to some of the era's most elite and secret units. He spent time with the Long-Range Desert Group, a forerunner of the SAS, known for its deep penetration missions in the brutal North African desert. He also worked with the Special Operations Executive, or SOE, the legendary organization Winston Churchill ordered to set Europe ablaze. The SOE specialized in espionage, sabotage, and guerrilla warfare. For the rest of his life, Lee was famously tight-lipped about what he actually did. When interviewers pressed him for details, he would often lean in and say, "Can you keep a secret?" When they'd eagerly reply, "Yes," he'd say, "So can I." This wasn't for dramatic effect. He had signed the Official Secrets Act, a lifelong vow of silence. While we don't know the exact details of his work, it was undoubtedly high stakes and incredibly dangerous. He was part of the machinery of special operations, working to disrupt the Axis war effort from the inside. His military discipline and his understanding of real-world conflict brought a stunning gravitas to his acting. While directing The Lord of the Rings, Peter Jackson once tried to tell Lee what kind of sound a person makes when they're stabbed in the back. Lee calmly stopped him and said, "Peter, have you any idea what kind of noise happens when somebody's stabbed in the back? Because I do." It was a chilling reminder that the man who played fiction's greatest villains had seen real evil up close. Section 5. Alec Guinness, The Future. Obi-Wan Kenobi at war. Long before he guided Luke Skywalker as the wise Jedi Master, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Sir Alec Guinness was guiding landing craft through treacherous waters as a young officer in the Royal Navy. Known for his incredible versatility, Guinness was one of the greatest actors of his generation. But like so many others, he put his career on hold to serve his country. In 1941, Guinness enlisted in the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve and was commissioned as an officer the next year. By 1943, he was a temporary lieutenant in command of a landing craft infantry, or LCI. His most memorable moment of the war came during Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Sicily in July 1943. Guinness was tasked with landing 200 British soldiers on the beaches. The night of the invasion was chaos. Huge waves made transferring the troops to his smaller craft incredibly difficult. To make matters worse, a signal delaying the invasion by 1 hour never reached him. So, acting on his original orders, Guinness pushed forward, navigated the rough surf, and successfully landed his 200 men. He was, in fact, the very first of the invasion force to land. But when the main naval bombardment began an hour later, on the new schedule, it looked to his superiors like he was an hour late. He was brought before a furious commander who tore into him for his supposed tardiness. Guinness, ever poised, explained that he hadn't been late, but early. The commander, in disbelief, asked what a man like him did in civilian life. Guinness calmly replied, "I'm an actor." He then added a line worthy of any of his roles, and you will allow me to point out, "Sir, as an actor, that in the West End of London, if the curtain is advertised as going up at 8 p.m, it goes up at 8 p.m. and not an hour later, something that the Royal Navy might learn from." Later in the war, Guinness also used his landing craft to ferry supplies and agents to Yugoslav partisans. His service was a defining chapter of his life. It's probably no coincidence that one of his most celebrated roles, which won him an Academy Award, was as Colonel Nicholson in The Bridge on the River Kwai, a film all about the pressures of military leadership and the psychological toll of war. Section 6. Lee Marvin, the tough guy who earned his scars on screen. Lee Marvin was the ultimate tough guy. With his gravelly voice, premature white hair, and intimidating stare, he played hard-bitten soldiers, ruthless villains, and grizzled cowboys. But unlike a lot of actors who just adopt a tough persona, Marvin's was forged in the fire of combat as a U.S. Marine in the Pacific. Born in New York City, Marvin was a rebellious kid who got kicked out of several schools. In 1942, at age 18, he dropped out and enlisted in the Marine Corps. He served with the 4th Marine Division as a scout sniper, an incredibly dangerous job that required him to operate ahead of his unit to gather intel and take out enemy targets. He fought in key battles across the Pacific, but his wartime service came to a violent end during the Battle of Saipan in June 1944. During the assault on Mount Tapachau, one of the most brutal fights of the battle, Marvin's unit was nearly wiped out. Marvin himself was hit by machine gun fire, which severed his sciatic nerve. As he lay wounded, a sniper shot him again, this time in the foot. He spent over a year in naval hospitals and was awarded the Purple Heart before receiving a medical discharge in 1945. The war left him with scars, both physical and emotional. He struggled with depression and the loss of his friends. He once said, "After the war, I had a great deal of trouble with the civilian life. I couldn't handle it. I was a wild man." His acting career started by chance. While working as a plumber's apprentice, he was asked to fill in for an actor who got sick. He was bitten by the acting bug and used the GI Bill to study theatre. He brought a raw, authentic intensity to his roles that few could match. When he played soldiers in films like The Dirty Dozen, he wasn't just acting. He was channeling a reality he had lived and survived. Lee Marvin is buried in Arlington National Cemetery, a place of honor for a man who served his country with distinction and whose on-screen toughness was, in every sense of the word, earned. Section 7. B. Arthur, the Golden Girl, was a Marine. Here's a story that you just won't see coming. When you think of B. Arthur, you probably picture the sharp-tongued Maud Findlay or the sarcastic Dorothy Zbornak from The Golden Girls. With her tall frame, deep voice, and perfect comedic timing, she was a TV icon. What you probably don't picture is her in a Marine Corps uniform, driving a truck during World War II, but that's exactly what she did. Long before she was a Golden Girl, Bernice Frankel, her birth name, was one of the very first women to join the United States Marine Corps' Women's Reserve. In February 1943, just days after the reserve was created, a 20-year-old Frankel enlisted. For years, she publicly denied her service, but official military records, uncovered after her death, tell the real story. Her military file gives a fascinating peek into the woman who would become B. Arthur. A handwritten note reveals why she joined. "I heard last week that enlistments for women in the Marines were open, so I decided the only thing to do was to join." Her interview assessment described her as argumentative and frank and open, traits that would later make her characters so beloved. She was first trained as a typist, but she requested a transfer to motor transport school. She spent the next 2 years working as a truck driver and a dispatcher at Marine Corps air stations. And she was a good Marine. She rose steadily through the ranks, from private to corporal to sergeant, and was ultimately promoted to staff sergeant before her honorable discharge in September 1945. Her story is a powerful reminder of the millions of women who stepped up to serve in non-combat but absolutely vital roles during the war. They shattered stereotypes and proved that patriotism and bravery weren't just for men. The thought of Dorothy Zbornak as a tough-as-nails Marine Staff Sergeant might be surprising, but it's a hidden piece of her history that makes her legacy even more remarkable. Section 8. Charles Bronson, the real-life tough guy. Charles Bronson's on-screen persona was all silent, stoic toughness. He was the classic hard man, an actor who could say more with a steely glare than most could with a page of dialogue. He played vigilantes, gunslingers, and soldiers in films like The Dirty Dozen and the Death Wish series. This image wasn't just an act. It was rooted in a man who had survived a brutal childhood and the dangers of aerial combat in World War II. Born Charles Bukinski, he was one of 15 kids in a poor Lithuanian immigrant family in a Pennsylvania coal mining town. Life was unbelievably hard. He started working in the coal mines at age 10 after his father died. When he enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Forces in 1943, the military was actually a step up. He once said, "I was eating and sleeping well. I never had it so good." He was trained as an aerial gunner and in 1945 was assigned to a B-29 Super Fortress crew based on Guam. From there, he flew 25 combat missions over the Japanese home islands. As a tail gunner, he had one of the most isolated and vulnerable jobs on the bomber, facing intense anti-aircraft fire and attacks from Japanese fighters. It's widely reported that on one of these missions, Bronson was wounded in action, an injury for which he received the Purple Heart. He served for 3 years before being honorably discharged. The war was his escape from the mines, and after returning home, he used the GI Bill to study art and then drifted into acting. He changed his name from Bukinski to Bronson in the 1950s during the Red Scare, worried his Russian-sounding name would hurt his career. But the hardness forged in the mines and the skies over Japan never left him. It gave his performances an authenticity that people loved. Charles Bronson wasn't just playing a tough guy, he was one. A man who had faced real hardship and danger and came out the other side forever changed by it. Section 9. Sam Kidd, the entertainer of Stalag 20. While many actors served in combat, some endured the war in a different kind of hell. A prisoner of war camp. Sam Kidd was a British character actor, a familiar face in hundreds of films and TV shows from the 1940s to the 1980s. And his wartime story is one of incredible resilience. Born in Belfast, Kidd joined the Army Reserves in the late 1930s. When war broke out, he was called up and sent to France. He was captured early in the war and would spend the next 5 years as a prisoner. He was held in Stalag Voitier, a German POW camp in Poland. In the brutal and demoralizing camp, Kidd found a unique way to serve. He took charge of the camp's theatrical activities, staging and acting in plays to keep his fellow prisoners' spirits up. This wasn't just a hobby, it was a lifeline for men facing starvation and despair. He was so dedicated to this work that when he was offered a chance to be sent home after 3 years, he turned it down. He chose to stay into the camp to continue his theater work, believing it was vital for the well-being of the other prisoners. In recognition of his service, the Red Cross gave him a special honor, a pair of drama masks made from the barbed wire of the prison camp itself. After the war, his experiences launched his acting career. He saw an ad for advisors on a film called The Captive Heart about life in a POW camp. With 5 years of first-hand knowledge, he was a natural fit. He was hired, ended up with a role in the film, and a long career was born. His story is a powerful example of how, even in the darkest of places, the human spirit can find a way to bring light and hope. Section 10. David Niven, the Debonair Commando. On screen, David Niven was the witty, charming, debonair English gentleman. With his pencil moustache and easy grace, he starred in classics like The Pink Panther. But behind that polished exterior was a man of real courage, a graduate of the Royal Military College Sandhurst, who left a booming Hollywood career to fight for his country. Unlike most British actors who were told to stay in Hollywood, Niven was one of the very few who immediately went home to rejoin the army. During a chance meeting, Winston Churchill himself told him, "Young man, you did a fine thing giving up your film career to fight for your country. Mark you, had you not done so, it would have been despicable." Finding regular army training a bit dull, Niven volunteered for the newly formed Commandos. He eventually came to command A Squadron of a top-secret reconnaissance unit known as Phantom. Phantom's job was to operate deep behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence on enemy positions, and reporting back to HQ in real time. He took part in the Allied invasion of Normandy, landing in France a few days after D-Day. He rarely spoke of the war, despite being a great storyteller, but he did once tell a story about calming his men's nerves before a mission with his classic wit. He told them, "Look, you chaps only have to do this once, but I'll have to do it all over again in Hollywood with Errol Flynn." By the end of the war, he had risen to the rank of lieutenant colonel and was awarded the American Legion of Merit for his exceptional work with U.S. forces. David Niven proved that a man could be a sophisticated gentleman and a tough, effective soldier, serving his country with the same quiet dignity he showed on the movie screen. Conclusion. So, what do we take away from all this? These stories are a powerful testament to a generation that answered the call of duty without a second thought. They were actors and artists, but they were also patriots who stepped away from the glamour of Hollywood and into the grim reality of a world at war. They flew bombers, stormed beaches, survived captivity, and operated in the shadows. They didn't do it for fame or for a role. They did it for a cause they believed in. They came back as changed men, carrying experiences that would forever shape their lives and their art. They proved that real heroism isn't acted out on a soundstage. It's lived through courage, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to the person standing next to you. Which actor's story surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more hidden histories of the heroes you thought you knew. Thanks for watching.